And your quadratic formula is this. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and all that's over 2a. The one thing with this one is when you're going off this, is that where they're getting the a and the b and the c from, that's from any quadratic where you have ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0. Now again, realizing that the a and the b and the c can be positive or negative, you don't really care. It's just that this thing has to be set equal to 0 to get the answer that you're looking for. And for most of the problems that's in section 2, it's, okay, here you go. Here's a problem. Let's plug it in, work it out. Let's see what the answer is going to be. They do one other little different thing with it where we're going to look at one part of it to determine the answers, but even that is pulling the answers out of the quadratic equation, just one little part of it there. Okay, so the very first thing is, that's our first question. We're going to get our a value, our b value, and our c value, and then we're just going to plug it in the formula and play around with it. So whatever's in front of x squared, that is your a value. So your a value is 2. Whatever's in front of the x, that is your b value. And whatever number you have at the end that's off by itself, that's your c value. And once you have those three numbers, now here's the one thing, be careful when you're plugging these numbers in. So as you're plugging these in, I would say put parentheses around every single a, b, and c value when you go through this. So it's negative b, so it's minus negative 5, plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared minus 4 times a times c, and that's all over 2 times a. And it's a small thing, it takes just a couple extra seconds to do that, but when you're working these out, if you put every single a, b, and c term in parentheses, you almost guarantee yourself not to miss the signs. And if you miss the signs, you're pretty much getting the whole thing wrong. So just one of those things to be careful of. And a lot of times people will miss it on this very first number, that when they do the negative b, they automatically assume that number is always going to be a negative because you've got the minus sign in front of it. Well, this is one where what happens when you do minus a negative? Make it a positive, right? So right off the bat, that's a positive 5. When you do negative 5 squared, it doesn't matter whether this b term is negative or positive. When you square that number, it's always going to be a positive answer. So then we're doing negative 4 times 2 for negative 8. Negative 8 times negative 1 means that's a positive 8. And that's over 2 times 2 for 4. Okay, so the b term, it'll change the sign from, in this case we started with negative, we changed it to positive. If it had been positive, we would have changed it to negative. But this b squared term that's here, that term will always be positive because you're squaring whatever that number is. So if it's 2 negatives, you make it positive. If it's positive, of course, it stays positive. This one, it varies depending on the sign. Sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative. So one little small note you can put in there, that term when you square it will always be positive, no matter what you plug in. Alright, so that's 5 plus or minus. When you do 25 plus 8, that is 33 over 4. And the only thing you can do then is you have to take that square root and break it down. 33 would be 3 times 11. Both of those are prime. There's nothing you can do to break that down, so there you go. That's your answer. Now, the one bad thing is you don't have that plus or minus button in the middle. So technically, when you do that, you're going to have to do one answer is 5 plus the square root of 33 over 4 and then comma 5 minus the square root of 33 over 4. Okay, but again, if we were doing something in class, doing paper pencil, this answer would be good, but they don't give you that plus or minus button there. If there's any one good thing about the Math 112 homework, if you're going on to it, that you do get the plus or minus button. So that's the one thing that's good about the Math 112. They give you that plus or minus button to work with. Okay, the only other thing, now, besides that one of the other things that they'll ask you to do is when you're going through these, they may ask you to give an exact answer. So that is an exact answer. You don't do anything with it. The other option they may do is they may ask you for a decimal answer. If they ask you for a decimal answer, well, you take that square root of 33 and change it to a decimal number. And they should tell you exactly how many places to go to. They should tell you to round it to 2 decimal places. So that's one where you would take out your calculator. We've got to do 33 and square root it. So it's 5.74456. They tell you to round it to 2 decimal places. So for that one, 5 plus, that'll make it 5.74. Oh, sorry, take the square root out there. And then 5 minus 5.74. Now, I guess technically on these, you're supposed to go out more decimal places, so let's go 445. Because we have to round the final answer off to 2 decimal places. So in the meantime, go ahead and use 2 more spaces than what you need, because if not, you may get a small round off error. So if you do this, you've got what, 10.7445 divided by 4. This one, when you subtract, you get negative 0.7445 divided by 4, and somebody help me out with those 2 answers there. We go to 2 decimal places. So we get 2.686, so that answer would be about 2.69. And for the other answer, we get a 0.7445 divided by 4. The answer just needs to be negative, so it's going to be negative 0.186 or negative 0.19. Okay, so whether they tell you to give an exact answer, give a decimal, the only difference is you still set them up, you still solve them the same way. At the end, you'll just have to use your calculator to figure out what the square root is. So the setup is the same exact basic thing. It's just a matter of just playing around with the calculator once you get there. Okay, so most of the answers that we're going to do for the rest of the way, we'll just go ahead and leave it in radical form with the exact answer, because we can play around with the calculators and get the decimal answer. There's just one to show you what to do. Just work the numbers out and see what you can get off of it. Okay, so for this one, let's go with 8x squared plus x equals 3. Okay, the only catch on this one is it's not equal to 0. So the very first thing you want to do is subtract the 3 and bring it back to the left-hand side. So so that you have 8x squared plus x minus 3 equal to 0. Okay, now you've got your numbers you can pull out. So A is 8. Your B is 1. And your C value is at -3. When you plug it in. And again, when you're plugging, even though if it's just a 1, I'd still go ahead and put it in parentheses. It's a -1 plus or minus square root of 1 squared minus 4 times A times C. And that's over 2 times A. Again, it's not a big thing, but just to be on the safe side, I would say every time you plug in those values for A, B, and C, always put them in parentheses. It only takes a split second longer to do that, but again, it should clarify any questions you've got on whether you have positives or negatives. Okay, so that's a -1, plus or minus. 1 squared is 1. -4 times 8 is a -32. But -32 times a -3, that's a positive 96 over 16. So that's -1 plus or minus the square root of 97 over 16. So we got to take 97 and break it down. Say odd number 3 doesn't go. Of course 5 doesn't go. We check it, 7 doesn't go. 9 definitely doesn't go. And more than likely, if you get to 9 and there's nothing that's there, there's probably a good chance that there may not be anything else. I mean, we can go back and check all the odd numbers. 11 doesn't go. 13 doesn't go. 15 definitely doesn't go. Yeah, if we go through and check the numbers, none of those break down. So for that one, that's your answer. So if we split it up, it's -1 plus the square root of 97 over 16. And then -1 minus the square root of 97 over 16. Question? Did I miss ahead? Because we've got square root of 1 squared is 1. 4 times 8 is 32. 32 times 3, 96. Didn't think about the 1. Okay. Okay, so for that one, the 97 doesn't break it down, so that's your 2 separate online answers. Again, they could ask you for the decimal answers. You would just take those numbers, plug it in, figure out what the decimal answer is, and then we're good to go. Okay, now again, depending on the square root, sometimes they'll break down, sometimes they don't. The ones we're looking at here, the ones I've been flipping through with the homework, I haven't seen any yet that do that. Doesn't mean that you may not get one, but there's a possibility that you may get one that you might can break it down just a little bit. But it seems like that everything so far is going to be that once you've got this number, that's about as much as you can do. Okay, and then when you're going through these, they kind of give you a good hint on the next ones. That they tell you, for this one, you've got 6x squared plus 3x plus 2 equal to 0. They tell you to use the quadratic equation, but even better than that, they tell you find all the complex solutions. And as soon as they tell you to find the complex solutions, that should let you know that you're going to be taking the square root of a negative number. So they go ahead and give you a good heads up on this one with that part of the directions that you're going to have a negative square root. Okay, so we've got our A value is 6, our B value is 3, our C value is 2. They're all positive, which makes it a little bit easier. So we've got negative of 3 plus or minus 3 squared minus 4 times 6 times 2. And all that's over 2 times 6. Okay, so negative 3 plus or minus. 3 squared is 9. 4 times 6 is 24 times 2 is 48. That's over 12. Negative 3 plus or minus the square root of negative 39. And that's over 12. Okay, and again, if you start to check on the negative 39, you can break it down. If you had 39, you could break it down as 3 times 13. But both of those are prime, so again, that one doesn't go any farther. That's all you can do. Now, the only thing you can do, though, is since that's a negative, the only thing we would do difference between the square root of 39 and negative square root of 39 is that if 39 won't simplify, that's our answer. But when you put the negative in, that's where you have to take that answer and just put an I variable out front or behind it, wherever you want to put it there, just to let you know that you have it. So if it's square root of negative 39, it'll be negative 3 plus or minus square root of 39, and then put your I variable behind it. Make sure, again, it's outside the square root, and that's over 12. Okay, now again, here's where they kind of contradict themselves from what they did back in the first part of chapter 10. That when we had an answer that was something similar to this, where we had the fraction part of it here, they just would leave it this way. For this one, kind of like they were doing on the back part with the other part of the complex numbers in 10.8, they actually are going to make you split this thing up as negative 3 over 12 plus or minus the square root of 39 over 12 and put the I term here. Because you can simplify negative 3 over 12 and make that negative 1/4 plus or minus the square root of 39 over 12 and put the I term at the end of it. Okay, and again, that's where you would take it apart, rewrite it as negative 1/4 plus the square root of 39. The other one would be negative 1/4 minus the square root of 39 over 12. And for those, again, that's one of those where there's a possibility that if you were to break this square root of 39 down and basically you could take a 3 on the outside or a 2, if you had a 2 out front, you could take the 2 and 12 and divide them and make it square root of 39 over 6. But that one didn't have it, so we'll just leave it that way. Okay, and then the last thing that's in section 2. So all the problems in the beginning, it's just use the quadratic formula, use the quadratic formula, use the quadratic formula. The last thing they throw at you is the discriminant. And with the discriminant, that is the inside of the square root. That's the b squared minus 4ac. That when you're doing these problems that's back here, all the work that you really do, because this first number you're just changing the sign, this one you're going to multiply by 2. All the work you do is on the inside. So all that work that's on the inside is kind of special because of all the work you're doing there. And they call that the discriminant. And basically what it is this. They're going to ask you to tell the number of real solutions. Again, it's the real solutions. Now, it doesn't tell you what they are, it just tells you how many that you have. So it will tell you the number of real solutions. Of whatever that equation is that we're given. Okay, and here's basically your three options. That if you do b squared minus 4ac, if you work that number out and it's a positive number, so that on the inside of it you would have a square root of something that's positive here. If it's the square root of a positive number, you're going to do the plus or minus of that number, whatever it is. So they're telling you, all right, if this thing happens to be greater than 0, or if it's positive, then you're going to have two solutions. All right, option 2. Take that same b squared minus 4ac, and this time let it equal 0. Okay, if you square root 0, that would be 0. And what happens if you add 0 to something? Doesn't change anything, right? What happens if you subtract 0 from something? Doesn't change anything, right? So when you're doing the negative b, plus or minus, all that stuff, if that number happens to be 0, if you do that number plus 0, that number minus 0, it really doesn't do anything at all. So you wind up having just the negative b, and that's going to be over 2a whenever you plug this thing in. So that whole plus or minus is just irrelevant, because when you add or subtract 0, it doesn't do anything. So all you're left then is that negative b over 2a, which means you're only going to have one solution. Okay, and you only have three options. Either something is positive, something 0, or something's negative, so that's the last one we're going to look at. So what happens if b squared minus 4ac is less than 0? And I guess going back to that last question up here, that if we took the square root of a negative number, this wasn't real, right? It's imaginary or complex. So if b squared minus 4ac is less than 0, you have no real solutions. And that's the key thing on this one is. That you do get two complex answers, but they're not real, so that's all right, well, there's no real answers off this thing. Okay, so let's just give you a couple examples and let you see what you have. And again, this part of it, they should only ask you for how many solutions. They're not actually going to make you solve. I mean, they could, because you could go back and still find the answers from it. But you're pretty much just going to have whatever question you have here, and they're just going to ask you to use a discriminant to tell how many solutions it has. Okay. Okay, so let's go with 2x squared minus x plus 6. And again, they're going to tell you to use the discriminant to tell me how many solutions you have. You don't have to find them, just tell me how many it has. So a is 2, your b value is -1, and your c value is 6. So we've got b squared minus 4ac, so that is -1 squared minus 4 times a times c. So -1 squared is 1. -4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 6 is 48. So that's 1 minus 48. That is a -47. Okay, now probably one of two things. I think the two things you're going to have to do as you're going through these problems. One, they're going to tell you what is the value of the discriminant. So you'd have to tell me the discriminant is negative 47. So that's your first answer. Second answer then is they're going to ask you how many solutions, how many real solutions does it have? And again, if that number is negative, it has no real solutions. So on all those questions, it'll be a two-part answer. First part is they're going to ask you what is the discriminant. Second part, then they're going to ask you, tell me the number of real solutions. And you'll just have to put in 0, 1, or 2. Okay. And again, they're all in that same category. Just here's the numbers, plug them in, work through it, see what you can get.